were facing a triple crisis here. Why am I calling it a triple crisis? One is because of the health crisis, the COVID-19, which we are all struggling with. We know we have struggled with things like SARS, H1N1. Nigeria has done a tremendously excellent job in shutting down the Ebola right away. However, now was the time where the entire world was taken in by this crisis of health, which was the COVID-19 pandemic. The second was the economic crisis, which was going to emanate from this pandemic, because as we were shutting down, definitely productions and revenues, everything was coming to a halt. The third one was the climate change, the sustainability crisis that we are talking about. So here in Europe, we are facing a triple crisis. It's not just the pandemic, it's a triple thing which has empaneled us, and we are strongly under the effect of this one. We had to shift our focus. Initially, our focus was on the luxury products demand or the consumption that was slowing down because China was impacted, where we have almost twice of the luxury brands consumption as compared to what we have in Italy. But as the situation further worsened, we shifted our focus to supply chain assurance within our country. We needed to make sure that we have to have the supplies of essential goods first before we can talk about the luxury brands. We needed to understand, where do we save money? How do we restructure to make sure we were not in debt and we were having liquidity? Because you would agree with me, however large a business is, cash is the king. You might be having assets, you might be having factories all across the globe, but if you do not have cash, you cannot survive. And your only option is to go bankrupt. The cash is king. We needed to make sure that we had liquidity in place. And that's when companies started pushing the government to come up with a strong recovery strategy. And what the government has come up now is a 400 billion euro stimulus to the companies that are getting affected due to this pandemic, which is largest, again, in the history of Europe. So it's not about thriving anymore. We are struggling to survive, in fact. So that's the condition we have here in Europe. Why does it all happen? We have beautiful business continuity plans in our businesses, especially the organizations which are large enough and which come from an organized sector. They have wonderful business resilience plans. Cool. But what they miss out here is their business is resilient. However, their business model is not resilient. They cover for all the things like their products, their marketing, their sales, but they forget about their business model. They forget how they need to be prepared when such a pandemic strikes and how they need to mitigate. What you see on the screen, you see a red spike on the graph, which is called the response. That's the phase we are in right now. That's what our executives and teams are looking at, meaning we are in a reactive mode. Right now, what's coming to our mind is, how can I make the next day possible? How can I meet the supplies for the next week? That's what we are looking at, maybe nothing more than that. However, we really appreciate if our executives can look further and look into the yellow part and the green part, telling us that they need to look into the recovery and restoration as well. If you're just thinking of right now kind of response, which is a reactive response, it's not going to turn in the long term. So we need to be proactive instead of being reactive. And here is a simple 7-block chain structure. I have picked it up from my strategy consulting that I do for clients, and we have had a number of clients that we are working with right now in this pandemic scenario where they are building up their business model resilience. So this is a very crisp and a brief summary of what we talk about there. And I have picked up the 7-block chain. Let's go through these 7 things one by one. And once these 7 are taken care of, we can feel that we are pretty strong to take care of any pandemic that strikes us. So not only take care of any pandemic that strikes us, but once it has stricken, like it has already now, how do we sail through? So the first thing is situation monitoring. How well do you think are we monitoring the situation in Nigeria right now? As a business, when I say situation monitoring, I mean, we need to be aware of what's really happening in the world, because we are not alone. We know how our trade is dependent on other countries around the globe, and we cannot survive in isolation. So we need to be aware of what are the scenarios in various parts of the world and how they are being controlled. And it's really dynamic. It's not something that you can set today and forget about it for a week. No, it's like chasing a moving target. It's changing continuously. And we have to be very sure of the organizations we are looking at for information like this. For instance, a very reliable source in this case is the WHO, which is the World Health Organization. The next point that we talk about is handling our operations, because a pandemic like this is a major operational risk. We need to make sure we have our legal procedures in place, because this is the kind of scenario when we have most of the legal issues. Imagine what happens when one of your employees gets affected by COVID-19 being at work, God forbid. But what if it happens? That is when we have the most cases of suing the organizations from the customers or from the employees. So we have to be ready for things like these. At the same time, you have your contracts with the clients. Some of the contracts are on a yearly basis, some are on a biannual basis, and many a times we miss out on small nitty-gritties of the contracts which can protect us in these scenarios. So we have to have a strong legal support. That's what the major operation part covers. In addition to having the teleconferencing facilities, for instance, you're asking your employees to work from home, but are you ready for that? Or are they ready for that? Because they depend on you as an organization. Have we given them enough resources that they can actually be working from home? What percentage of organizations do you think have actually provided the resources to their employees to be able to work from home? What do you think, Benny? Here.
Well, I'll say, it came as a surprise to a lot of organizations. So a lot of them were not prepared for the work from home operations, but they were just forced to, have to implement it. So I'll say, well, some projected early enough and put things in place to make it work. Some were hoping the pandemic wouldn't get serious, and so they didn't really prepare. And they just found themselves having to start operating that way. So for organizations like that, I think they are learning as they go. So the resources might not be, the resources might not be provided at once, but as they go and they see probably the level of operations and maybe what they are getting from, operating that way, they start to probably improve on the resources that they are giving to their employees.
Absolutely, 100%. So that is where our learning curve is. That's what we are learning. When we see, okay, we have provided a certain amount of resources to our team, and if the team is not able to provide the results that we are looking for, okay, we then pump in more, because we do need the results, and that is our learning curve. How can we improvise ourselves? How can we still be efficient while we have a restriction on the kind of environment in which we are operating right now? Our salespeople cannot be moving out to make sales.
Exactly.
Except your organizations like Jumia Foods, are they still operating and supplying food items at your home you order? Right?
Yes. There wasn't any restriction on essentials like food, pharmaceutical products. So companies operating in that space are still in business. You can still order your pizza, you can still order your food. Yeah, so they are still operating.
Absolutely, they are still operating. And when they're operating, they have to maintain extended hygiene protocols. Would you agree with that?
Yes, they do. Exactly, they have to. I think now they don't do cash on delivery anymore. So you have to pay with your card. And even when they come to your doorstep, they maintain the normal social distancing, the space, I think, is it 5 feet or something that you're supposed to, the space between you and the next person. So they maintain that, and they always make sure they are with their gloves, nose mask. Yeah, they are trying to be safe as well.
Absolutely, because again, they're human beings first.
Exactly.
So as employers, we have to be very mindful of the kind of safety kits we are providing to them. So that is when we need to extend the hygiene protocols, which we already have in our organizations. You rightly pointed out, that's how we are doing in Italy as well. Because we have our grocery being delivered to our home, but they maintain a certain distance and they will be all packed in their overalls at times. There was a joke going around on WhatsApp or LinkedIn, I don't remember, and which was showing a pizza delivery, and the man was coming in the PPE kit, which was totally covered. So that was the kind of joke going around, which is not a joke, which is okay. It's about the safety of our people, and that's what's most important.
Exactly.
And same goes for the manufacturing operations. Our fast-moving consumer goods, our soaps, sanitizers, the things that we really need, those industries which cannot shut down, they have to maintain a really extended hygiene protocol within the organization. For sure, they were doing it already. Not that they weren't, but they need to be more mindful of it now. Extended cleaning, more number of times, providing better equipment to your people, etc. So it's good that our industries, our manufacturers are mindful of that. Assessing business process criticality is another block that we need to look at. Now, what do I mean by that? There are various business processes in an organization, and not all of them are absolutely critical. We can always prioritize those business processes. That's what I mean when I say assess the various processes in your business and arrange them in order of criticality. There are some which are extremely mission oriented, meaning you need to manufacture a certain food item and you need to ship it to your client or your customer, which is extremely critical. On the second case, you have your business critical, such as some revenue producing activities, which are not that important and they come with a timeline of about 24 hours. Whereas the processes which are mission critical, they come with a timeline of 8 hours. And on the third rank, number 3, we have the administrative processes, which come with a timeline of about 1 week. So we can actually extend them. And this assessing the business process criticality also helps us to know how many employees do we need in the organization as of now. Because we have an Italian company called BMC who are manufacturing the air filters for automotive companies. And they feel that